I am Ethan Cole, and I always believed life was simple if you stayed loyal and loved the right person. You think too much, Lily used to laugh. Just live, Ethan. I would smile and say, I am living. I have you. Lily Cole was my wife, my peace, my home. We had a small house, a steady routine, and what I thought was a perfect life. Dinner's ready, she would call, and I would answer, coming. Those simple moments felt like everything. You trust me, right? She once asked. I didn't even think. Always, I said. That word meant everything to me. I worked long hours, but I never complained. You work too hard, Lily would say. I do it for us, I replied. She would kiss me and whisper, then don't stop. That was our rhythm. Love, trust, routine. Then Luna Hayes came into our home. She needs us, Lily told me. Of course, I said. She's your sister. Luna looked exactly like Lily, but her eyes felt different. Hi, she said softly. Thanks for letting me stay. Your family, I replied. At first, I saw her as fragile. She barely spoke. You okay? I asked one night. She shrugged. I'm trying. Lily stepped in quickly. She's fine, Ethan. Don't push. I nodded, but something in Luna's silence stayed with me. Days passed, and I started noticing things. Did you tell him? Luna whispered once. Not now, Lily replied. I walked in. Tell me what? I asked. They both froze. Nothing, Lily said quickly. Just sister stuff. I laughed it off. Sounds serious. It's not, Luna said, avoiding my eyes. I tried to ignore it. You're overthinking, I told myself. But small moments kept piling up. Shared looks. Quiet tension. Half sentences. You two are acting weird, I joked one evening. Lily smiled too fast. We're normal. Luna forced a laugh. Yeah, totally normal. I stared at them. Okay, I said slowly. Something didn't sit right, but I pushed it away. Trust your wife, I reminded myself. That was what I always did. One night, I sat alone. You're quiet, Lily said, sitting beside me. Just tired, I replied. She touched my hand. Don't think too much, Ethan. I looked at her. I don't. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Luna stood in the hallway, watching us. Our eyes met for a second. Then she looked away. Good night, she said quietly. Night, I replied. Lily leaned on my shoulder. Everything's fine, she whispered. I nodded. Yeah, everything's fine. But my chest felt tight. My thoughts wouldn't settle. You trust me, right? Her voice echoed in my head. Always, I had said. I closed my eyes and repeated it again. Everything is fine. I held on to that belief like it was the only thing keeping me steady. I didn't question it. I didn't dig deeper. I didn't want to see what might be hiding underneath. Because if I did, everything could fall apart. So I chose silence. I chose trust. I chose her. And as I sat there, staring into nothing, one thought kept creeping in, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. I told myself everything was fine, but deep inside, something didn't feel right. The silence in our home started to feel heavier each day. You're overthinking again, Lily said one morning. Maybe, I replied, forcing a smile. Luna sat across the table, barely touching her food. Eat, Lily told her. I'm not hungry, Luna murmured. I looked between them. Did something happen? I asked. No, they both said at the same time. I laughed awkwardly. Okay, that's not weird at all. Lily rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. Am I? I asked. She leaned closer. Yes. Stop it. Luna stood suddenly. I need some air. She walked out without another word. Iwachitiako. She's just stressed, Lily said. From the breakup. I nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe. But the feeling didn't leave. It stayed there, quiet and sharp, like a warning I couldn't fully understand yet, but couldn't ignore forever. I just didn't know what it meant yet, or how much it would change my life soon enough. I woke up early. The rain had stopped. She was already awake, standing near the window. I said, "Morning." She didn't answer right away. Then she turned slowly. "You're awake," she said. Her voice felt different. I sat up. "Are you okay?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "I'm fine." But something inside me tightened. I looked at her face. It looked like Lily, but not fully. The way she stood. The way she breathed. I said, "Lily, are you okay?" She paused. Too long. "Yeah," she said finally. She walked past me. I noticed something on the floor. My wife's ring was on the table, not on her finger. My heart stopped. I said, "Where is your ring?" She looked at her hand quickly. "I forgot it." I stood up slowly. "You never forget it." Silence hit the room. She turned away. Why are you acting like this? She asked. My voice shook. Because something is wrong. I stepped closer. Where is Lily? I asked. She didn't answer. I repeated, louder, where is my wife? Her eyes finally met mine. And in that moment, I felt it. Something was completely wrong. She whispered, Ethan, stop. I shook my head. No. Tell me. She backed away. You don't understand. I said, then explain it to me. She started crying. I didn't want it to go this far, she said. I froze. What are you talking about? I asked. She covered her face. Lily asked me to stay tonight, she said you wouldn't notice. My breathing stopped. That's impossible. I whispered. She shook her head. I'm not her, Ethan. I stared at her again, really stared this time. The truth started hitting me in pieces. Every detail. Every silence. Every strange moment. My legs felt weak. No, I whispered. She stepped back. I'm sorry. I stood there shaking. The room felt too small. Everything I believed was collapsing. I whispered, who are you really? She looked at me with tears. You already know, she said. My mind refused to accept it, but my heart already had. I took a step back. My voice broke completely. I thought you were Lily, she said nothing. Only silence remained between us. And in that silence, everything ended for me. I froze. Because I knew, that wasn't my wife. I found Luna sitting on the kitchen floor, knees pulled close, eyes red like she had been crying for hours. I shut the door behind me slowly and said, we need to talk. She didn't look up. I knew you'd come, she whispered. I stepped closer. Start explaining. Now. Her hands shook. Ethan. I didn't want any of this. I raised my voice. Didn't want what? What the hell is going on? She finally looked at me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I laughed once, sharp and broken. That's not an answer. She stood up fast. Lily planned it. I froze. Don't say her name like that. Luna shook her head quickly. You don't understand. She told me everything. I stepped back. Everything? About what? Her voice cracked. About you. About testing you. I stared at her. Testing me? She nodded fast. She said she needed to know if you were loyal. If you would break. I felt my chest tighten. So this was a game to her? Luna looked away. It was more than that. I grabbed my phone. I'm calling her. Luna reached for my arm. Don't. I pulled away. Watch me. I dialed Lily's number. It rang twice. She picked up. Yes? Her voice was calm. Too calm. I said, what did you do? A pause. Then she replied, what are you talking about, Ethan? Luna stood behind me, shaking her head. I said, don't play games with me. Luna told me everything. Silence. Then Lily spoke again, slower. So she finally talked. My stomach dropped. You admit it? She sighed like I was bothering her. It wasn't supposed to come out like this. I shouted, you tested me using your own sister? Lily's voice stayed cold. Don't make it sound dramatic. I couldn't believe her tone. Dramatic? You destroyed everything. She laughed softly. You're overreacting. I gripped the phone harder. Why, Lily? Why do this to me? She answered instantly. Because I needed to know what kind of man I married. I went silent. Luna whispered behind me, I'm sorry. I covered the phone for a second. Don't talk. Then I said, so what now? Was I supposed to pass your test? Lily replied, you did pass, in a way. I felt my hands shake. In a way? She said, but not completely. I closed my eyes. You're insane. Her voice dropped. Careful, Ethan. That hit me harder than anything. I said, you don't get to threaten me after this. She responded, I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality. I looked at Luna. She was crying silently. I said into the phone, you lied to me every day. Lily replied, no. I just didn't tell you everything. I laughed bitterly. That's the same thing. She didn't answer. I said, why Luna? Why involve her? Lily finally said, because she's the only one you would believe. I froze again. Luna whispered, she told me I had no choice. I covered the phone again. You had no choice? Luna nodded. She said she would cut me off completely if I refused. My head spun. So you both played me? Luna cried harder. I didn't want to, Ethan. I felt everything collapsing inside me. I returned to the call. You ruined everything. Lily said softly, no. I revealed the truth. I shouted, this isn't truth. This is sickness. Her voice sharpened. Then what are you going to do about it? That question hit me like a wall. I had no answer. Only silence. And in that silence, I realized something I didn't want to accept. Nothing in my life was real the way I believed. And Lily knew it all along. I heard the door open and I already knew it was her. I said, "We need to talk, Lily." She laughed like nothing happened. I stepped forward and said, "Don't play games with me." She rolled her eyes. "You always act like a victim." I said, "You destroyed everything I trusted." She replied coldly, "You never trusted me anyway." I shook my head. "Mark was right about you." She paused. "So you're bringing your little friend into this?" I said, "He's my best friend, and he sees what you are." Claire Benson stepped in and said, "Lily, you didn't tell me it was this messy." I looked at her and said, "So you brought backup?" Claire said, "Don't blame her. You were never enough for her." I felt something break inside me. Never enough? I gave her everything. Lily said, "Exactly. And it still wasn't what I needed." I stared at her. "What did you need then?" She said, "Control. Stability. Not someone who questions everything." I whispered, "So this marriage was just control to you?" Lily said, "Don't make it sound dramatic. It was practical." I stepped back. "You're not even sorry." Claire said, "She shouldn't be. You're the problem here." I laughed once. "So I'm the problem for trusting my wife?" Lily said, "You're exhausting, Ethan." I looked between them. "Both of you planned this?" Silence. I felt my throat tighten. Was my entire marriage a lie? I waited for an answer, but none came. Lily said, "You already have your answer." I shook my head. "No. I need to hear you say it." Claire said, "You're pathetic." I snapped, "Stay out of this, Claire." Lily said, "Don't talk to her like that." I pointed at Lily. "You brought her into my house." Lily said, "It was never just your house." I whispered, "I gave you everything." Lily said, "And I gave you a life you couldn't handle." I stepped closer. "You planned all of this from the start?" Lily said, "Yes." I felt my chest burn. "Why me?" Lily said, "Because you were easy to control." I looked at Claire. "And you supported this?" Claire said, "She needed someone strong on her side." I shook my head slowly. "This is insane." Lily said, "No. This is reality." I felt everything collapse inside me. I whispered, "I don't even know you anymore." Lily said, "You never did." I stepped back, my voice breaking. "So what was I to you?" Lily said, "A choice. Nothing more." I stared at both of them, feeling empty. I finally said, "Then I guess I was never your husband." I turned away for a moment, trying to breathe. Lily said, "Don't walk away from this." I said without looking back, "I already am." Claire said, "You're going to regret this." I replied, "No. You will." Lily laughed again, but it sounded broken now. I said softly, "This is over." Lily said, "Not until I say it is." I finally looked at her properly. "You already lost me." I felt my voice steady for the first time. "And I see you clearly now." Lily said nothing this time. Claire stepped closer. "You're making a mistake." I looked at her. "The mistake was trusting both of you." Lily's voice dropped. "You think you can just leave?" I answered, "Watch me." I walked toward the door, heart heavy but firm. Lily said, "Ethan." I stopped but didn't turn. Lily said, "You'll come back." I said quietly, "No. I won't." I opened the door slowly, feeling everything behind me fall apart. I whispered to myself, was my entire marriage just a lie? I stood outside for a moment, breathing hard. Rain started again, like the world agreed with my pain. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just kept walking away from everything I thought I knew. Lily's voice echoed behind me, but it didn't reach me anymore. I realized something final in that moment. I was never in a marriage. I was in a lie. I tightened my fists and kept walking. Everything I believed was gone now. But something inside me was waking up. I wasn't the same man anymore. I said to myself, this is just the beginning. I looked back one last time at the house, and I didn't feel anything except distance. No love, no regret, just clarity. I walked forward knowing my life had ended, but something else had already started inside me now completely. I stopped answering calls. I stopped replying to messages. I just stayed in my room, staring at nothing. Mark kept knocking. "Ethan, open the door, man." I finally opened it and he said, "Bro, what the hell is going on with you?" I looked at him and said, "Nothing matters anymore." He stepped inside and said, "That's not you talking." I said, "You don't know me anymore." He grabbed my shoulder. "I know enough. You're falling apart." I pulled away and said, "Let me be." He shook his head. "No. Not like this." Mark sat down and said, "Bro, something's not right here. You need to wake up." I laughed weakly. "Wake up to what?" "My wife destroying my life." He leaned forward. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. I looked at him. You think I didn't try to understand? He said, no, I think you're still trying to defend her. I stayed silent. He said, that silence says everything. I looked away. I just can't process it. He replied, then start accepting it. Meanwhile, Luna avoided me completely. Every time I entered a room, she left. One night I caught her in the hallway. I said, Luna, wait. She stopped but didn't turn. I said, you can talk to me. She whispered, I can't. I stepped closer. Why not? She said, because she'll know. I frowned. You're still scared of her? She nodded without looking at me. You don't understand what she's capable of. I said, then help me understand. She shook her head. I can't. Then she walked away again. I stood there feeling even more alone. At work, I couldn't focus. My boss called me into his office. Ethan, your performance is dropping. I said, I know. He said, is there something going on? I almost laughed. Yeah. My life is falling apart. He didn't know what to say after that. I walked out early that day. That night, I started noticing things I ignored before. Lily's phone buzzing late at night. She stepped outside every call. I once asked, who was that? She replied, work. I said, at midnight? She smiled coldly. Busy people don't check clocks. I stayed quiet, but I started watching more carefully. I checked our shared accounts. Strange transactions. Unfamiliar names. I asked, what is this? Lily said, nothing you need to worry about. I said, everything you do involves me. She replied, that's where you're wrong. That line stuck with me longer than I expected. Mark said, you see it now, right? I didn't answer immediately. He said, bro, you're not crazy. You're just late to the truth. I finally said, I think I am starting to see it. He nodded. Good. Now don't stop. One evening, I found a message notification on Lily's laptop. It disappeared too fast, but I saw enough. I said, what are you hiding? She shut it quickly. Nothing. I stepped closer. You're lying again. She stood up. You don't get to question me like this. I said, after everything, I don't get to question you. She replied, no. That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not sadness. Something clearer. I looked at her and said, you're not going to keep controlling this story. She narrowed her eyes. Excuse me? I said, I won't stay silent anymore. She laughed softly. And what exactly will you do? I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at her. For the first time, I wasn't scared. I said quietly, I'm going to find out everything. She stared at me, silent for a moment. Then she said, you won't like what you find. I replied, I already don't like what I know. That night, after she slept, I stayed awake. I kept thinking about everything Mark said. Everything Luna avoided. Everything Lily hid. I whispered to myself, this is not over. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was deciding. And in that silence, I made a choice I couldn't take back anymore. I couldn't sleep that night, so I called Mark. I said, I need help finding the truth. He replied, then stop sitting in your pain and start moving. The next day he brought me to a small office. A man looked up and said, Daniel Reeves. I said, you're the investigator? He nodded. Mark told me your situation. I said, then you know it's complicated. Daniel replied, complicated stories are my job. He asked, what do you want to know? I said, everything about my wife. He leaned back. That's a dangerous request. I said, I already live in danger. He nodded slowly. All right. A few days passed. Daniel called me in. Sit down, he said. I asked, what did you find? He slid a file toward me. Your wife has a pattern. I frowned. Pattern? He said, you're not the first husband in her story. My stomach dropped. What are you saying? He replied, she's done this before. I opened the file. Names. Photos. Old records. My voice shook. This can't be real. Daniel said, it is. I said, she married others? He nodded. And each time, the outcome was similar. I felt my hands tighten. So I was just another target? Daniel said, looks like it. I stood up. No, there's more to it. He said, there's always more. I asked, financial stuff? He replied, yes. Money moves, hidden accounts, manipulation patterns. I whispered, she used me. Daniel said, she used everyone around her. I sat back down slowly. Mark said, bro, I told you something was off. I said, I didn't want to believe it. He replied, now you don't have a choice. That night, Luna asked me to meet her alone. We met at a small cafe. She didn't look at me at first. I said, you wanted to talk. She nodded. I can't stay silent anymore. I said, then tell me everything. She took a deep breath. She didn't just control you, she said. I asked, what do you mean? Her voice shook. She controlled me my whole life. I froze. Luna, what? She said, since we were kids, she decided everything for me. I said, that doesn't make sense. She looked up. It does if you knew her longer than you did. I asked, so all this time? She nodded. I wasn't free. I was part of her system. I leaned forward. System? She whispered, people. Relationships. Marriage. Everything was planned by her. I felt sick. Why would she do that? Luna said, because she needs control. Not love. I asked, why are you telling me this now? She said, because I can't carry it anymore. I said, you were part of what she did to me. She lowered her head. I didn't have a choice. I said softly, you always have a choice. She looked at me with tears. Not when she holds everything over you. I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I said, you said something earlier. What was it? She hesitated. Then whispered, I wasn't just part of the plan. I was trapped in it. Those words hit harder than anything Daniel showed me. I asked, is there more? She nodded slowly. A lot more. I leaned back, feeling everything connect now. Lily wasn't just lying. She was building something around me from the start. I said, I need every detail you have. Luna nodded. Then you're not going to like what comes next. And for the first time, I realized the truth wasn't just hidden from me. It was built to trap me from the very beginning. I stopped crying that night. I just sat there and said to myself, enough. The next morning, I told Mark, I'm done being quiet. He looked at me and said, finally, you sound like yourself again. I replied, no, I sound like someone who's waking up. He nodded. Good. Now stay that way. I started gathering everything. Messages, bank records, old emails Daniel gave me. I said to myself, if she built this lie, I'll rebuild the truth. Mark said, you sure you want to go this deep? I said, I don't have a choice anymore. He replied, then do it properly. Lily noticed the change. One night she said, you've been acting strange lately. I replied, maybe I'm just seeing things clearly now. She narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? I said, it means I'm not confused anymore. She smiled slightly. You think you've figured something out? I said, I know I have. She leaned closer. Ethan, don't do anything stupid. I looked at her and said, funny. I was going to say the same to you. That was the first time she didn't respond right away. I met Daniel again. He said, you're getting smarter with this. I replied, I don't feel smart. I feel angry. He nodded. Anger is useful if you control it. I said, then help me control it. He handed me more documents. This is what you were missing. I said, what is it? He replied, the full structure of her financial manipulation. I whispered, she really built an empire out of lies. Daniel said, and you were inside it. I said, not anymore. Mark called me that night. Bro, I found someone who can help legally. I said, who? He replied, Sophia Turner. She deals with cases like this. I said, cases like what? He said, emotional and financial manipulation marriages. The next day I met her. She looked at me and said, Mark told me your situation. I replied, then you probably think I'm crazy. She said, I think you're late, not crazy. I asked, late for what? She said, realizing what you're dealing with. I said, can you help me expose it? She leaned forward. Only if you're ready to lose the version of your life you still believe in. I said, that version is already gone. She nodded. Good answer. I showed her everything. She said, this is bigger than a marriage issue. I asked, then what is it? She replied, it's a pattern of control and financial structuring. I said, so she planned all of it? Sophia said, yes. And carefully. When I went home, Lily was waiting. She said, where were you? I replied, taking control of my life. She laughed softly. You think you have control? I said, I know I do now. She studied me carefully. Something changed in you. I said, yeah. I stopped listening to lies. She stepped closer. You're making a mistake. I replied, no. I'm fixing one. She said, you can't fight what you don't understand. I said, that's why I understood first. That night, I reviewed everything again with Sophia on call. She said, you're ready for the next step. I asked, what's that? She replied, turning evidence into action. I stayed silent for a moment. Then I said, do it. Mark texted me, you good? I replied, better than I've been in a long time. He said, you sound different. I said, I am. I looked at myself in the mirror and said quietly, I wasn't broken anymore. I was done being played. And for the first time, I actually believed it. I wasn't running from her anymore. I was walking toward the truth, and I knew she wouldn't be ready for what came next. I first noticed it when Lily stopped answering calls in front of me. I said, something's happening, isn't it? She replied coldly, nothing you need to worry about. I said, everything you do involves me now. She snapped, stop acting like you understand anything. I looked at her and said, I understand more than you think. The next day, rumors started spreading. Mark called me and said, bro, people are talking about her at work. I asked, what kind of talk? He hesitated. Bad stuff. Financial stuff. Lies. I said, so it's starting. He replied, it's already spreading fast. At home, Lily was different. She paced the room and said, someone is leaking things. I asked, what things? She turned sharply. Don't play dumb. I said, I'm not playing anything. She grabbed her phone and said, this is sabotage. I said, or truth finally catching up. Claire showed up one evening uninvited. She said, I need to talk to you. Lily said, not now. Claire replied, actually, yes now. I stayed quiet while they argued. Claire said, I'm done being part of this. Lily frowned. What are you talking about? Claire said, I can't defend you anymore. Lily's voice dropped. You're leaving me? Claire said, I'm leaving this mess. I watched Lily carefully. For the first time, she looked unsure. Claire walked past me and said quietly, you don't know how deep this goes. I said, I'm starting to. She didn't answer. Later, Luna came to me. Her hands were shaking. I said, you look scared. She said, I am. I asked, of her. She nodded. I said, you don't have to be anymore. She took a deep breath and said, I'm done hiding. We went to Lily together. I said, she wants to talk. Lily laughed. Now she talks. Luna stepped forward. I'm not your puppet anymore. Lily's smile faded. Excuse me? Luna said louder, you heard me. You don't control me anymore. Silence filled the room. I watched Lily's face change. For the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. She said, you think you can just turn on me? Luna replied, you already lost control a long time ago. Lily looked at me. You're behind this. I said, no. You did this to yourself. She stepped closer. Everything I built, I interrupted, was built on lies. Her phone kept buzzing. She ignored it at first, then checked it. Her expression changed. I said, bad news. She didn't reply. Luna said softly, it's happening, isn't it? Mark texted me, her company is collapsing online. I read it and said, it's already public. Lily looked at me sharply. What did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. Truth did. Her voice rose. You're destroying me. I said, no. I'm just not stopping it anymore. She froze. That was the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Claire's words echoed in my head, you don't know how deep this goes. I was starting to see it now. Every piece falling apart, every connection breaking. Luna whispered, she's losing everything. I said, she already has. Lily heard it and shouted, I'm not done yet. But her voice didn't sound strong anymore. Mark called again and said, bro, she's losing clients, partners, everything. I said, I see it. He asked, what now? I didn't answer immediately. I looked at Lily standing there, shaking for the first time in my life. Luna stood beside me, breathing hard, finally free. I felt something heavy inside me. I said quietly, do I end this completely, or walk away? Lily looked at me like she still expected control. Luna looked at me like she wanted peace. And I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about what kind of man I wanted to be after all of this. I told Mark, call Sophia. It's time. He said, you're really doing this? I replied, there's no going back now. He nodded. Then finish it. I met Lily in the same house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. I said, we need to talk. One last time. She looked at me and said, you've already said everything. I replied, not everything that matters. She crossed her arms. So this is your big moment? I said, no. This is the truth finally speaking. She smiled weakly. Truth? From you? I stepped closer and said, you don't get to rewrite this anymore. She said, you think you've won something? I answered, I'm not here to win. I'm here to end it properly. That made her pause. I placed the file on the table. Daniel's investigation. Sophia's legal report. Everything. She didn't touch it. I said, read it or don't. It's still real. She said, you actually went this far? I replied, you trained me for it. Her voice got quieter. You really turned everyone against me. I said, no. You did that yourself. She shook her head. I gave you everything. I laughed once. No. You gave me control problems and lies. She stepped forward. You think I don't regret it? I looked at her. Do you? She hesitated. That hesitation said everything. She whispered, you ruined everything, Ethan. I didn't raise my voice. I said, no, you did. Silence hit the room. She looked down for a second. I didn't mean for it to fall like this. I said, but you knew it would. She didn't answer. I continued, you planned, manipulated, tested, controlled. You didn't love me. You managed me. Her eyes flickered. That's not fair. I said, it's accurate. She suddenly snapped, you're not innocent either. I nodded slowly. I never said I was. That confused her for a second. I said, but I didn't destroy people to feel safe. She looked away. You don't understand me. I said, I understand enough now. I opened my phone and showed her the legal document Sophia prepared. I said, this is already in motion. Her eyes widened. You can't do this. I said, it's already done. She stepped back. You're really going to destroy me? I replied, no. I'm just not stopping what's already happening. Her voice broke slightly. After everything, you don't feel anything? I paused. I said, I did. That's why I'm here. For the first time, she didn't have control in her voice. She said, I made mistakes. I replied, mistakes don't look like this. She whispered, what do you want from me? I said, nothing anymore. That hit her harder than anything else. I said, I came for closure, not revenge. She laughed weakly. Closure? From this? I said, yes. From this version of you. She finally sat down. So it's over? I said, it's over. Her voice cracked again. What happens to me now? I said, that depends on the system you built. She looked up at me. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not angry. Not controlling. Just afraid. I said quietly, you spent years controlling everything. Now you don't control the outcome. She whispered, I didn't think it would end like this. I said, neither did I. I turned slightly toward the door. She said, Ethan, I stopped but didn't turn. She said, softer, was any of it real to you? I stayed silent for a moment. Then I said, it was real until it wasn't. And then I walked out. No shouting. No chaos. Just silence behind me. And for the first time, I knew the story was finally done. I stood outside the courthouse and said, it's finally over. Mark nodded beside me. Yeah, but it doesn't feel like a victory. I replied, it's not supposed to. He looked at me. So what is it? I said, it's peace. Finally. Lily didn't fight it anymore. Inside, she faced everything alone. I didn't go in to watch. I didn't need to. Mark said, she's accepting the terms. I said, she has to. He asked, do you feel anything? I paused. I used to think I would feel everything. Now I feel nothing, and that's better. Luna met me later that day. She said, I'm leaving the city. I said, where will you go? She replied, anywhere that doesn't feel like her shadow. I nodded. That's good. She looked at me and said, I'm sorry for everything. I said, you don't need to carry it anymore. She asked, do you hate me? I answered, no. I just don't need to hold it anymore. She smiled weakly. I want to start over. I said, then do it properly this time. She nodded and said, thank you, for not destroying me too. I replied, I didn't save you either. You did that yourself. Mark patted my shoulder. So what now, bro? I looked at the street and said, now I live. We walked for a while in silence. Then he said, you changed. I said, I had to. He asked, for better? I thought for a moment. For real. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment. No arguments. No lies. Just silence. I said to myself, everything I thought I needed is gone. I remembered Lily. Not with anger anymore. Just distance. Mark texted me, you good? I replied, better than good. I'm clear. I looked at the window and said quietly, I didn't get revenge. I got something better, my life back. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel trapped in anyone's story. Not hers. Not mine. Just present. Luna had her path now. Mark was still here. And I wasn't the same man who once believed blind trust was love. I stood up and said, that version of me is gone. And I didn't feel loss when I said it. I felt freedom. The past didn't disappear, but it stopped controlling me. I walked to the door, paused, and looked back at the empty room. I said one last time, I'm done looking back. Then I turned off the light and stepped forward into whatever came next, without fear, without chains, and without her.